Hi, good afternoon. Welcome everyone who's here in the studio as well as all of our online visitors. We're here at the Harvard Chan Studio, and I'm Linda Powers Tomasso, a research associate in the Department of Environmental Health at the T.H. Chan School of Public Health. It is my enormous privilege today to join in this conversation with Professor Jack Spengler. All of you know him and respect his work, and so this half hour is to shed some additional light and really some levity to a long conversation, a long career, I should say, around this conversation, which we will be able to touch on the highlights, really. We have someone who has helped define modern environmental health, but that's only half of his work. He's also mentored hundreds of graduate students who are now in positions of influence around the world. I was lucky enough to be one of those students that Jack mentored. Jack recently retired from his role as Akira Yamaguchi, Professor of Environmental Health and Human Habitation, and now he's transitioning to his role as research faculty. Today we're going to reflect on the impact of his work, obviously, and more broadly how surroundings shape our health. We need to start with how you got here, Jack, not how you got to retirement, but how you got to the right profession. Many faculty come to public health from various disciplines. What was it that influenced you to take up the environmental health career?
Well, thanks for doing this, Linda. It's a real privilege to have you here interviewing me. But you're right, you look at resumes and you think it's a linear process. You went to college, you went to grad school, did a postdoc, and here you are. But it's anything but straight, right? Most of us have very circuitous routes. And so I was undergrad at Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, something that we shared.
Was I.
Very different generation, but we shared the same institution. And I was in physics because I thought, well, physics, I could do other things if I do physics. But not thinking why I was in physics. But then I think it was a sophomore, junior summer, I found myself in Durango, Colorado. I was part of a natural science program put on by Vince Schaefer, a naturalist who understood learning and learning from the natural world. But he put together undergraduates' experiences in different places around the country. And I ended up being in the San Juan Mountains and seeing the monsoons come up and the dynamic thunderstorms that were flashing across the sky. I said, yeah, that's it. I want to be in weather, right? I want to see dramatic weather. And so I went on to a degree in atmospheric science with wonderful teachers, and Vince Schaefer started that program at University of New York. But then towards the end, I had a visit from Jim Mahoney, who was a junior faculty at Harvard here, at School of Public Health. And he was air pollution meteorology. I said, well, this is a direction I could go in. And so he invited me to be a postdoc with him. And then the transformation happened, right? Then I got a degree in public health, and I started understanding how important exposures are to air pollution and what we might do about it. But that was far from a straight route. Right. All these key things just were inflection points. Yeah.
I've already learned something new about you. I didn't know that you spent time in Durango. So good. As we go, I'll learn a lot more. Yeah. Right. Here we go. There's probably not a single student of environmental health anywhere in this country, if not the world, who has not read the highly influential 6-city study that you worked on as a junior researcher with such pioneers in the field as Professor Frank Spicer. What, being a junior researcher on that, influenced you the most and affected your future thinking in environmental health exposures?
Well, everything. Yeah. Let's put it that way. And so let me take the audience back in time. So this is in the early 70s. We just had Earth Day. EPA was new. NIH, Environmental Health Sciences, was new for part of the National Institutes of Health. And air pollution was bad. There were hundreds of coal-fired power plants still in full operations, right? Blowing across the U.S. and into Canada. You know, acidifying lakes and affecting us. I was thinking about this, there were hundreds of incinerators in Boston. You'd look across the skyline, you see smoke coming out of everything. Cars were not controlled. So air pollution was bad, right? Now you've got to go to other countries going through their development to experience that again, or wait for the next forest fire, right? But that was when EPA was doing some health research and Congress said no. They said they didn't want a regulatory agency doing health research, and that's when they turned to NIHS. David Raw was the director, and he approached Ben Ferris and Frank Spicer and said, we need an independent health study. And so that's the origin. That's the CNN version, right? The headlines only. Read Doug's book, Doug Dockery's book, for the full details. But that started the process, and the fact that they understood that this was needed other disciplines, it needed exposure, it needed air chemistry, it needed all these other disciplines to come in. And so it was a cast of dozens of us from different, Diane Gould's in the audience here, Jim Ware, a biostatistician, led by 2 physicians. Doug Dockery did his research as part of this. So we really built the disciplines together. And I'd like to think that at that point, air epidemiology changed, environmental epidemiology changed, because projects that went forward fully recognized the need to be quantitative about the exposure science side. So that became a big inflection point.
Well, that work helped to clarify, I think to a great degree, the need for more scientific assessment of outdoor air exposures. But then you made a switch yourself from the knowledge of the harms that were being done at both cities and national levels here to what would be your really critical analysis of the harms being done by indoor air pollutants that in many cases were as harmful, if not more harmful, than the outdoor exposures. Your push for indoor air quality standards, and I think the most recognized, most widely publicly recognized one was the 1986 ban on smoking in airlines. I mean, all of us remember, of a certain age, remember being in the last row of the non-smoking area and have somebody blowing smoke on your head the whole flight, right?
They drag it forward as they walk up the cabin.
Exactly, and we have you to thank for that. I don't know if people in the audience know this. But what convinced you that indoor environments deserved far more scientific and policy attention?
Well, thanks, Linda. I'll tell us some of those stories along the way, but I think it's the 6 City study again. Because here we're measuring the pollution that these kids that were in our study were breathing, what their parents were breathing in their outdoor environments, in dirty cities and clean cities. And then we started looking at our data, recall this, where we saw at the time, one or both parents smoking. 75% of the kids lived with smoking parents. Or they were cooking with gas for NO2 or particles. So here our city, Topeka, Kansas, had as much air pollution that the kids were breathing, and the adults, than a dirty city because virtue of indoor sources. So it made it very complex. So that got us really curious about the indoor environments. And I think that came at a time also when there was another energy embargo, right, which we're facing now. When all of a sudden people were tightening up homes, they were shutting off ventilators for schools to save money, air pollution indoors got worse. So those things sort of converged to say this is an important area. And many doctoral students' dissertations later, it's still being an important, led by Joe Allen and Gary and others in this school.
Well, your advocacy work led to investigation of quite some offbeat venues, I would say that. Tell us about some of those.
All right, so back in my early days as junior faculty, I tried to extend my youth by playing in the hockey leagues around Boston. And we'd often get on the ice at 9, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. You know this, Joe. And the Zamboni machine is cleaning. And we walk into these rinks, I go, this smells like a garage, And so I started bringing my instruments with me. So I put them on the penalty box, and I sat there with it sometimes, and started measuring carbon monoxide. Because the machine was a poorly tuned engine, combustion engine, putting out NO2, putting out CO2, and CO, excuse me. So we saw the levels, very high levels. And then we started seeing news reports of kids passing out in tournaments and sure enough, it was carbon monoxide. And that led us to start making a lot of measurements in indoor environments and in locker rooms. In fact, I talked to the Harvard coach, the hockey coach, and we measured carboxyl hemoglobin in the hockey Harvard players before practice and then they cleaned the ice, and then and could show an increase in their carboxyhemoglobin. That convinced Harvard to buy an electric Zamboni.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so that now has solved that problem, right? Good ventilation and remove the source. But it led us to meet Frank and Richard Zamboni and work through them, educating rink owners on how to use their apparatus. So it was a real. I saw the solution, and it worked out well. Another fun thing were airplanes. You mentioned that, right? So we never could do this now. You couldn't get through TSA with the instruments we brought on. Portable particle counters, right? Canisters to measure VOCs in the air. And we just walked onto the plane. And I'd tell the flight attendants, I'm here to measure the cigarette smoke. Oh, good, good. This is where you go back here. So they let me walk around the plane and measure with my machines. And that made us realize the environments of airplanes was worse than the smokiest bar you ever went to.
Wow.
1,000 micrograms per cubic meter or more. And that eventually led its way into a National Academy of Science. I was a co-chair of that first air cabin study. And the one recommendation that we put out 10, the one that FAA took and the airlines were happy was to get rid of smoking. So that was, it gave me, the flight attendants gave me a bottle of wine one time when I knew that happened.
Well deserved. We all thank you for that too. Well, your professional career has been incredibly public-facing and institutionally engaged, well beyond your research being so influential. But beyond that, I'm not sure everybody here, and certainly those online, know your legacy also of your institutional, really introductions. You introduced so many vital changes in programs and projects. I'm just going to go through a few. One was the master's program, which continues at the School of School of Continuing Education. So it's a master's program in environmental management and sustainability, where I met you first as a student before coming to School of Public Health. The Harvard Green Campus Initiative with its revolving environmental fund. The Center for Health and the Global Environment at the school.
Which I inherited from Eric Shivian.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
From the medical school.
Exactly.
Yep.
But still, you were able to bring in corporations for corporate-sponsored research and grants, something that you called disruptive partnerships. And
radical collaborations.
Radical collaborations. All right, disruptive partnerships.
SDG 17, I renamed it.
Okay, fair enough. And I do remember, here's an anecdote for our audiences, that we arranged, among the many new applications of sustainability, we arranged, I mean, really, how naive could we have been? But we arranged a conference in Shanghai, totally from here. We were never there. We arranged in Shanghai a conference for 100 participants from 10 different countries, all professionals, a whole 3-day speaking program and everything on healthy urbanism, sustainable urbanism, which was a great success. And of course, we have a few members represented and certainly online of the JPB Fellowship Program for junior researchers in environmental health, which again, you had the foresight and vision to undertake and begin. So the questions are two from this long, innovative list. One, how do you do it all? Really.
Well, you don't do it all.
No. And two, how do you decide when an idea is ripe to move from research to practice?
Well, good. Let me take on the first one to demystify this a little bit, because you never do it alone. I have to give full recognition that while I was out doing these things, going to conferences, running these field studies, I had Carolyn at home, right? So
I was hoping you'd say that.
The anchor, right? She was too, but anyway, I fully acknowledge it. But that allows you to do things, right? I could teach at night, right?
Yes,
No, the kids
exactly.
were here. But then to have a rock-solid team here at Harvard, the two Tracys, Tracy Sachs, Tracy Marks, Joan, I mean, 35 years keeping me straight, keeping me online and scheduled, keeping me out of trouble most of the time. She would edit my stuff. She said, "You don't want to say this." But anyway, it's vital to have that. And then the supportive group. And I look at what our faculty are doing now, building that kind of sort of solidarity among their team, that they are with us for a purpose, right? They really are motivated to work together. So that becomes fundamentally important. And then also not doing it alone. So I would take you back 25, 26 years, right? Halfway back, right, in my career. And I started seeing these issues of sustainability just raise their head in universities. You know, a few things at Ball State, David Orr did some work. Not many. The Swiss might have been ahead of us, the Europeans, and thinking about campus responsibility. And I got a small grant from Neil Rudenstein, the president, to convene faculty, to talk about common issues we might from different schools. But I made it, the one thing I did right, I invited the administration. So Tom Vaughton, he was the vice president of operations for Harvard. Buildings and grounds, transportation, dining service, dorms, everything reported to him. So faculty can't do much on their own, right? But the fact that he and I had shared values, shared purpose that we wanted to change the university in these modest ways of being more reflective of those values, made it happen. And then we hired a dynamic person, Lee Sharp, to start the Green Campus. And we had support, not so much from faculty, I'd have to say, but support from administration and presidents along the way, and of course students. And now it's the Office for Sustainability. It is embedded in everything the university does. Right. And we all should be proud of that. This university is more green building certified than any campus in the world. And now they're moving into even more certification. The tree house, made out of timber, made out of reduced impact of energy on them, just doing marvelous things. But the origin card, we shared values to do things. So that was one. And then the great pleasure through the extension school. So Linda was one of my students in our course on buildings, green buildings.
And 101. You taught 101, everybody.
Yeah,
right.
that Joe Allen helped with, and George Buckley.
Right.
And so then you asked, well, we got to know each other a little bit more. And then she was the TA. I said, you know, Linda, you could do this course. She took over the course. And I was still teaching in the extension school, running one of the major courses we have. So along the way, you just feel like, you know, you surround yourself with like-minded people, and good things happen, right? So.
Well, thank you for including me then in that close-knit group that you have. As we know, environmental health is global. You've traveled around the world from projects in China, Japan, where you met Akira Yamaguchi, and Russia. And then you came back to work in public housing here with the Boston Public Housing Authority. These efforts look very different on the surface, but they're really undergirded by this tripod of environment, health, and systems thinking. How do you see these configurations, as they say, in that same way, or is there something different for you?
Well, I think there is that common denominator that everyone lives somewhere, right? We all have residences, and as our time activity studies say, we spend a lot of time indoors and a lot of time is in our houses. So these are really important environments. And the kinds of issues, they might change with modernity of products in one place and not another place, and outgassing, but the issues are pretty much the same. How do you treat water, dampness, mold infestation, insects, combustion indoors, evaporation from chemicals that are in our materials and in our consumer products. So these are everywhere, right? But it's never thought of as the whole system, right? How does a house now handle this for ventilation system, filtration system? That's very rarely part of it. But I learned from Yamaguchi, and I was over there many times to the North Island of Hokkaido with Jose was with us on many of those trips, and we saw how he looked at housing from his traditional architecture of post and beam Japanese construction, building temples that last hundreds of years, right? Earthquakes, but they stay up. How do you build a house to be sustainable and made out of wood and sequester carbon and ventilate? I mean, he thought of all these things, and heat with a low BTU burner, right? So all of this, I saw system thinking, very visually. So then Gary, you and I and Rona working and others working in public housing, we see the breakdown of systematic approaches, right? Provide housing, put some pesticides to get rid of the bugs, do these cosmetic things, right? Not thinking of the whole, how people live and use these facilities. So that was a real lesson. I got really educated in public health when we did that public housing. Saw how complicated people's lives were, and how difficult the agency had to manage these properties. But that led to great policy changes, which we're proud of, right? And then Gary went on to do Move to Green, to show that you can take these principles and put them in design and build better housing, improve it. Great outcomes there.
Right. We've had great faculty research, starting with Gary and others who have passed the torch forward to their students, educating them. Most recently, you and I have collaborated on a course called Advancing the Sustainable Reconstruction of Ukraine. And so this is a course for Ukrainians, online, free of charge course, now finishing its second year, with Ukrainian participants who are tasked with shouldering really the reconstruction of their country post-war. We have had more than 100 students in this. We've had more than 700 applicants for this course over 2 years. And it's really, when I think about it, it's an unlikely but yet logical extension of public health. I was wondering if you could tell us about the origins of the course and your own reflections after 2 years of course delivery.
Sure. I'd like to tell you, I really enjoy doing this with you. I think we find that this satisfies our soul, right?
Absolutely.
It really is an important thing to do. But share, before I answer this thing, tell where some of the participants come from. What are their professions in life when they're not hiding out in shelters, right?
Right.
Meeting us online in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. Letting them in really 5-10 times during a 2-hour session because they keep having their power interrupted. But we've had many that are sheltering under blankets because they have no heat. They live on the 20th floor. And you think about it. Okay, even getting to this studio on the 10th floor, if they've had their power interrupted, that means they're walking up, carrying children, carrying groceries. So even though they're professionals, so you imagine this, I'm saying even though that doesn't make them immune to the hardships of this war. My reflection, well, you're asking about who participated. Last year, we must have had 15 people from government ministries, reconstruction, transportation, communications, justice ministries. We have lawyers, we have financiers working with some of the international lending organizations, development, national development branches. We have had also a number of heads of NGOs who are very impressive, committed, passionate, working also for the human capital side of this. It's not just material reconstruction.
Rectors of universities.
Exactly. We have had 5 rectors of universities be part of our course. And so they're looking to reincorporate internally displaced persons, IDPs, foreign sort of exile during this thing, veterans that are coming back, but they have told us really the whole society is traumatized. And so all those with PTSD. So we're again trying to channel presentations we're making, lectures, etc., and trying to get experts, even trauma-informed design of buildings in order to incorporate that into the rebuilding process.
So our thinking, 2 years ago, the war's 4 years old. 2 years ago, we're still seeing these horrible pictures on our evening news, right? And reading about, and we felt like stand-byers. I did, right?
Yep.
I said, what can you do in this capacity? Sure, you can give to a charity and stuff. So that really started this concept, this idea. We had a few modest connections. Remember, we went to the Davis Center, we went to the Harvard Ukraine Research Institute, said went to the Grad School of Design, asked our fellow faculty to help us with this, and said, maybe we could do something, right, to help look forward, hopeful for a transition, a time when this devastation, think about there are towns that don't exist. There's no place to go back to. There's nothing left there. And we got figures just presented the other day. It's approaching $1 trillion of reconstruction that is needed. So anyway, but 2 years ago we said we got to do something. So we thought a modest course, 30 people, we start to develop. like you said, 300 apply.
For sure.
And then now we have the second cohort. And I feel we're very purposeful. We're building a network. They're building. They are the network. But we're helping them sustain this network as we look forward to it. We were online just the other day. 80 were online, not talking about our lectures, not presenting, but telling us what they wanted from us, what they wanted to do going forward. So here we are, we think we'll wrap up 2 years, we're done. We're not done. So, stay tuned, all of you. We're going to be asking you to help with this process going forward.
And I do have to share with you, it's one of the most rewarding things I certainly have ever done, right? Part of this nation rebuilding in our small role in that.
This comes from her work in the State Department, so she has a worldview of different situations, but this is unlike, well, unfortunately, it's like a few other places now. But,
right, but it all ties back to public health, too.
Yeah.
I've always been struck, since I first began working with you, of how you have stayed connected to your former students and colleagues, really in relationships that go back decades. So your legacy is going to be not only your environmental research, the scientific research, but it's also going to be the network of people that you have created across your career. Obviously, it has changed you, and I would like to know that this network of people that you have met and held hands with and brought them to professional careers of their own. How has this changed you, Jack?
Profoundly. I mean, I'll share. I haven't said this before, but they have so much to teach me, right? To watch their careers change, watch how they raise families, where they have impacts in their communities, their colleges, on the global stage, whether they end up as being deans, as some have, schools of public health. Ki Young Lee in South Korea, James Chan in Taiwan, Jenny, first woman president of a major university in Taiwan. To watch this is so of course I want to stay in tune, right? Who wouldn't want to see this unfold in front of your eyes? But I find these friendships important in life. It's common denominator. It's to feel you're part of a community and part of their lives. So that's enriching. And then oftentimes maybe something's on, a seminar comes up on my screen, some invite we're always getting, right? Or a newspaper article. I think of someone. I said, oh, they might be interested in this. I sent something to Lauren the other day about native tribal housing, indoor environments. And sure enough, here she's at EPA working on indoor air issues for tribal nations. So I don't know, just feel like you keep the connection going. Yeah.
And they're both thoughtful and helpful gestures, right, Lauren? I know, it's always, timing is just exquisite in that. I have only time for one more question. Half an hour goes very quickly here. And I'm wondering what you hope the next generation of environmental health researchers, practitioners, students will carry forward.
Well, I'm thinking back. It gives you time to reflect, right? After 50 years on the faculty. It was a lot simpler back then, right? It is so much more challenging. Yeah. We're in the era of complexity. So one thing, it's clear, they have to be good at more than one thing. That's for sure, right? And I think it has not been lost. And I really am proud not only of the fellows from the JPB Fellowship Program, but our own fellow faculty that recognize their obligation goes beyond the research and beyond the teaching. They have to get engaged in the solutions. You see it with Tamara and her work on chemicals and the beauty care. See it with Joe and building sciences. See it with Gary on healthy cities. That you've got to drive the solutions into society. And so it requires new skills, right? We never were taught this.
No.
So they I think, take on that challenge. And I think we're in, I read E.O. Wilson's Half Earth, right? If we're losing half the natural resources of the earth, we're looking at the recent climate projections. There are serious times ahead of us that complicate everything else we do on the environment, and you just have to be more emboldened and find your niche that is satisfying. I mean, I see it with Diane Hernandez working now with Con Ed, if I could say that, right? Engaging the utilities. this is how you prevent or decrease energy insecurity, right? Not just write about it, but work with them to do something about it, right? So that's the modern scholar.
And you have always said that we produce words, but we don't translate the words into practice.
Yeah.
And it's time to start doing
Now we have Claude to do it for us.
Yeah,
but
right.
that's all right.
No. Well, I want to thank you for condensing a career's worth of reflections into 30 minutes here. That's the time that we're allotted here, although we're going to continue the conversation after the camera shuts down. Recording of this conversation will be available on the Harvard Chan YouTube channel, and we invite everyone here to stay and to voice your own questions. So a round of applause for our online audience of 600.